In the last video in the CSS series, we gained an understanding of the CSS box model and discussed properties such as margins, borders, and padding. In this video, we'll apply some of those properties to our own HTML elements and see how they impact the display of the elements in the browser. Here we have a simple HTML page. It has an H1 heading of border styles, then several H2 elements followed by paragraphs. Each paragraph has a class with a name of a border that we'll be applying to that paragraph. If I expand the paragraph, it simply has an image with some text. Each one of these paragraphs has the same image and text. The difference when we view it in the browser, once the styles are applied, will be the type of border that we add to the paragraph. Looking at this page in the web browser with no CSS applied, this is what the page looks like. If we jump back in the code and expand the HTML head section, we'll see we have an HTML link element. It points to a style sheet that's in the CSS folder. The name of the file is border_style CSS, and if I open that, we'll see that all the styles are currently commented out. That's why when we viewed the HTML page in the browser, we didn't see any styles applied. So let's start adding these styles. First, I'll uncomment out the styles for the image tag, and this is a selector which says find all the HTML images in the document and set their width to 177 pixels and their height to 110. So if we save this and go back to the browser and reload the page, we'll see that we've simply resized all the images on the page. Now, going back to the code, let's uncomment the styles for the paragraph selector. Now this selector will find all the paragraphs on the page, give them a margin of 10 pixels, a padding of 10 pixels, and set the width of the paragraph to 30% of the viewable page area. So if I split this and we look at the HTML, that means that these styles will be applied to each one of these paragraphs in the document. Now right now we're not worrying about the value of the class attribute, we're just simply targeting the paragraph tag itself. So if we save this now and go back to the browser, and before I reload the page, I'm going to right click this element and choose inspect to bring up the developer tools. Now if I click the selector and move my mouse over the paragraph, which has the first image and text on the page, click it, we'll be brought to the styles for that paragraph. Now looking at the box model for this particular paragraph, we'll see that the content area is set to 839 by 150. Now that size is determined by the browser based on how much area it has to display the content in. And because we have the developer tools open, the viewable area of the page has shrunk dramatically. But in any event, those are the dimensions for the paragraph. Right now, if we move our cursor up into the padding, we see that there is no padding applied. If there's no values top, right, bottom, or left of padding around the content. Border is also not set, but the margin is set to 16 pixels top and bottom. And that's set by the browser just to give some default layout. Now let's jump back into the code and uncomment the CSS styles, which will apply borders to our HTML elements. Looking at the HTML, we'll see that each paragraph element has a class attribute with a different value. The values of the class attribute align with the class selectors in the CSS. So this CSS selector will look for all HTML elements that have a class of dotted. In our case, we only have one element, the first paragraph, that has this class. But because it's a class, it could be applied to multiple elements on the page, unlike an ID. The second style will look for element or elements that have a class of dashed, and so on. So the paragraph tags with their class attributes and their values align with the class selectors in the CSS file. So with the CSS file saved, we could jump back into the browser, refresh the page, and then we'll see that we now have a border around each of our paragraph elements. Using developer tools, we can now highlight the first paragraph and look at the box model in the CSS styles. We now see that we have a padding of 10 pixels all the way around the content. So the content is about 251 by 240. There's 10 pixels of padding, which you could see highlighted in green on the web page, between the content and the margin. The margin is 10 pixels all the way around. The border is 1 pixel with a padding of 10. So if we jump into the code and see how that's applied, we'll see the class of dotted has a border of thin, and in this case that's our 1 pixel. It's dotted and has this blue color. The dashed is similar to the dotted in that it has the blue color. Its style is dashed and the thickness is medium. The outset has a thick border with an outset pattern and the same blue. So in the browser, if we look at the next two paragraphs, we'll see a similar style to the dotted, the difference being that this has a dashed border and it's thicker. Again, using developer tools, if we highlight that paragraph, look over in the CSS styles, we'll see the border is medium dashed with blue. If I were to highlight this, change dash to dotted, now we see I have a dotted border. It's thicker than the dotted border above, but that's because the border above has a thin versus the dashed, which we just turned into a dotted, which has a medium. So let's go ahead and change this back to dashed, and now we have our dashed border. The difference in the other borders are the border style that's applied. So you see as we scroll down, this one has a border of outset. This is a solid border, a double solid border, grooved, ridge, and inset. So in this video, we applied margins, borders, and padding to our elements to gain a better understanding of the CSS box model. In the next video, we'll look at different CSS layout patterns.